Good evening. This is our class's final presentation, Module 9, Persuasive Speaking. Once again, this presentation will be on federal lands that are controlled by the federal government in western states. These lands are quite extensive and utilize, in some states, more than 50% of the state is controlled by the federal government. Not only is this probably wrong, but it restricts those states from utilizing revenues that could be captured in the state and utilized for the citizens of that state rather than being controlled by the federal government. With this being said, we have to wonder, why does the U.S. government need such a large area? Is it for national defense? For most purposes, no, it is not. It is to restrict the use of that property or that land from development or use because of possible endangered species, or they don't want to allow those natural resources and that water being solely used by that state. With it being controlled by the federal government out in the western states, they have controlled a large amount of public resources such as coal, oil, gas, and water. All of this can be utilized within that state. Let's take Utah, for instance. A lot of the watershed coming off of Utah is trying to be seized or controlled by the federal government for states such as Nevada and California, where they feel that the water coming off of Utah and Wyoming and Colorado should be given to those states because they have a larger population. This is really not the case that it should be. California should be utilizing desalination plants and taking water out of the ocean and utilized. As for Nevada, Las Vegas doesn't need all these waterfalls and fountains in front of their casinos. If they want it, then they should figure out a way, once again, to use water out of the ocean to be pumped back to them. That would surely cut down the water waste that these locations are utilizing, or have them come up with some other method and not force other states to give up their watershed. With that being said, what about other resources? What about the lumber? What about the land and minerals coming out of that? Should that be controlled by the federal government, or should those minerals and land be controlled by the states where the revenue goes back into that state? This is usually the better method of doing something, where the states has skin in the game and the federal government does not really have a whole lot that they want to do other than control the property and the land. Congressmen and senators on the East Coast should have very little to say what states out west do with their property. That would be like me telling my neighbor, I don't like your flowers and I want them out. I don't like that tree. I want it gone. There are locations now in certain states when you go into a gated community where they do tell you what you can and cannot do. If I elect to live there, I will follow those rules. But I don't live there, and I don't think I should have to be told, since I'm from a western state, that someone back here should be allowed to tell me what I can and can't do within the state that I'm living. One of the good things that the federal government has done, and BLM, Bureau of Land Management, is the wild horses and wild burro adoption program. This is actually one of the good things that has come out of BLM. Unlike them going in and stealing someone's cows because they're not getting the correct revenue off those lands. What they should do is give a notice, take the cattle off, and tell that farmer these are still your cows, but we're going to charge you care for them and give them a certain date. But where lands has been taken from the family that have owned that land and operated off of it for over 50 years, I don't think the federal government has a right to tell somebody, we're going to control the lands. If you want to utilize it, you have to pay us for it. This is not correct. And once again, other states that think they should be allowed to utilize items coming out of our state, such as gas and coal, and this money going back to the federal government rather than to the state. The federal government has taxes and they should get the revenue off those taxes, but not all the revenue coming off that federally controlled land. If they're going to take minerals off of federally controlled land, that minerals and that money should go back to that state, and that land should be turned back over to the citizens of that state. The federal government can say, okay, we want you to restrict use of the property, but you guys still should be controlling it. There's no need that the federal government control such a vast array of the money and the resources of another state. If they do that, then let's make all the states equally, where they take and control 50%, 20% of other states, not just the huge swath of the western states, but all states should have some type of skin in the game when they do this. Once again, I think that local municipalities and states can do a better job at not just regulating and controlling the lands, but managing their use as well. We can use our watershed and our lakes and rivers and reservoirs for public use for the residents of that state. And that revenue would be put back into the state. This is also something that I think that the federal government should stop doing, is selling leases on federal lands to wildlife outfitters and giving them control of the hunting rights to public lands. This is not correct and it should be stopped. These hunting rights are citizens' rights, and I don't believe very many citizens are going to give up their right to hunt on public lands, whether it's state controlled or federal controlled. These lands are the public's, the citizens of that state, and should be allowed free access or limited fees to hunt on those areas. As for endangered species, this is another area that the federal government utilizes the Endangered Species Act to take or restrict use of private property. And we should look at, do we want to control and restrict private property because it has an insect, such as the spider they found in Texas, and now that owner can't sell it or utilize that land because he fears getting penalized by the federal government? Once again, in conclusion, I think that we as a nation and should look at the way the federal government controls property and the amount of each state, and should pass a law that they cannot exceed a certain amount. If they wish to utilize that, then it should be utilized for a reasonable projects such as national defense or training. But if they're going to pull minerals, lumber, and water, they should be charged a fee, and that fee that the revenue generates should come back to that state and not to the federal government. Thank you, and I enjoyed this class and giving these presentations. Wish you all a good weekend and good night.